Welcome to U.S. Daily News Channel. In the second month of the war between Russia and Ukraine, the talks in Istanbul were a hope to the suffering people of Ukraine. Russia had agreed to withdraw its troops from the north. But local officials and U.S. intelligence reported on Thursday of new attacks on the northern city of Chernihiv and on the outskirts of Kyiv, where Russia has promised to sharply reduce combat operations. Against this attitude of Russia, the Ukrainian army was always on the alert, and all the Ukrainian forces repulsed the attacks of the Russian troops. Ukrainian Bayraktar TB2s and converted special drones dropped bombs on Russian armored pillars, while international joint forces and Ukrainian special forces recaptured dozens of regions from Russian forces. Russian troops were repulsed in at least 15 areas. We will examine the operations of the Ukrainian Air Force and Special Forces in all details shortly. The continued Russian offensive signaled that Moscow was no longer in a hurry to end its 5-week war. Russia has said it will reduce its military activities around the capital, Kyiv, and the city of Chernihiv, but diplomats and analysts noted that Russian advance in these areas has already stalled. They argued that Moscow's announcement was more an acknowledgement of the shortcomings of its military operation than a concession, and warned that Russia could redeploy forces elsewhere in Ukraine. Russian forces are largely lingering in parts of Ukraine, a senior U.S. defense official told reporters on Monday. The official said there was no change in the situation in Mariupol, Chernihiv, Mykolaiv or Kharkiv. He said Russian forces continued to use long-range fires in Mariupol, but could not take Mariupol. He added that there has been no change in the airspace or the marine environment. The official noted that Russian forces had not made any progress in Mykolaiv over the weekend, adding that that's why they are outside the city. It was underlined that Russian forces have launched more than 1,370 missiles in Ukraine since the start of the invasion. Senior U.S. officials also reported that after the talks in Istanbul, Russia's attacks in the regions mentioned did not decrease. Today, Ukrainian Bayraktar TB2 dropped the explosive on the equipment of the Russians in the Kyiv region. Ukrainian Forces Special Air Operations Team dropped explosives on Russian military equipment in the Kyiv area. Also, converted drones were used to strike. Aviation bombs were probably used from unmanned aerial vehicles. It is worth noting that previously there were videos of converted drones that were able to carry only 1 or 2 ammunition. The posted video shows the alternating reset of 4 explosive devices. Volunteer Serhiy Pritula: "The guys we helped sent some videos to cheer us up. There were Russian boxes there and they are no more," he said. In the Eastern Operation Joint Forces Zone, Ukrainian defenders successfully repelled 5 attacks by Russian invaders on Sunday. Against this two-faced attitude of Russia, the Ukrainian army has never relaxed with all its units, and it proves that it is always at the ready. The press service of the Joint Forces operation said in a statement, "Thanks to the dexterous actions of the Joint Forces, 5 enemy attacks were successfully repelled during the day. Our defenders inflicted losses on the Russian invaders." In particular, Joint Forces members destroyed 2 tanks, an infantry fighting vehicle and a vehicle. Joint Forces also seized 5 enemy tracked armored combat vehicles. According to the General Staff, the armed forces of the Russian Federation are trying to capture Popasna, Rubizhne, Severodonetsk and Mariupol in the Donetsk direction. They have no success. An unsuccessful attempt was made to attack Krasnohorivka. The enemy suffered losses and retreated. A total of 63 enemy attacks were repelled last week. As a result, the Ukrainian army destroyed 80 tanks, 72 armored vehicles, 48 vehicles, 19 artillery systems, 7 unmanned aerial vehicles, 14 aircraft, a helicopter, an enemy patrol boat and a Lear-3 electronic warfare system. In addition, since the first day of the invasion, Russia has lost 582 tanks, 1,664 armored personnel vehicles, 294 artillery systems, 93 MLRS, 52 anti-aircraft warfare systems, 121 aircraft, 127 helicopters, 1,144 vehicles, 7 ships, boats, 73 fuel tanks, 56 UAVs. This information was published by the Ukrainian General Staff on Facebook. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden made very harsh statements in Poland. The repercussions of these statements continue to be felt in the region. So how can Biden's 9 unwritten words affect the war in Ukraine? President Joe Biden's suggestion in Poland on Saturday that Vladimir Putin's onslaught on Ukraine should disqualify him from power triggered an international political storm. Back in Washington Sunday evening, Biden told reporters that he was not calling for regime change in Russia, echoing a message spelled out multiple times by his subordinates even before he had returned to the U.S. But the global reverberations from the remarks leave the administration facing grave questions. Some are strategic and could impact the future course of the war and so far elusive hopes for a ceasefire. Others are political and relate to Biden's standing at home, amid a torrent of Republican criticism, and internationally, as he seeks to keep the Western coalition together. It was clear from the speed with which administration officials worked to clarify Biden's remark that they knew it could be a big problem that could potentially make an already fraught European geopolitical showdown much worse. In a jab not in his scripted remarks, Biden said, "For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power," in a reference to Putin. A White House official said Biden meant that Putin cannot be allowed to exercise power over his neighbors or the region, and said Biden wasn't referring to regime change. Secretary of State Antony Blinken was even more categorical during a trip to Jerusalem on Sunday. "We do not have a strategy of regime change in Russia, or anywhere else for that matter," Blinken said. "In this case, as it is in any case, it's up to the people of the country in question. It is up to the Russian people." The cleanup language was hardly convincing given the clear context of the original quote. But a remark with such implications in a time of high tensions clearly needed walking back. And quickly. Any idea that the U.S. saw the conflict as an attempt to unseat Putin would be dangerous, since it would elevate the clash to a direct confrontation between the United States and Russia. Biden has scrupulously tried to avoid that scenario, notably blocking a Polish plan to send Soviet-made fighter jets to Ukraine to avoid the impression that NATO is taking a more direct role in the war. The situation is already on a knife edge since huge Western shipments of anti-aircraft and anti-tank missiles are fueling Ukraine's strong resistance and apparently causing heavy Russian casualties. There's no doubt that Biden handed Putin a propaganda gift that could undermine the U.S. president's own hard work in keeping the focus on Ukraine. Moscow's information complex is certain to present the war to the Russian people as a hostile push by the West in order to further obscure the truth about the unprovoked attack on Ukraine. This could ease the political pressure the West hopes will be built by harsh sanctions designed to change Putin's calculation. But Biden's initial efforts to avoid personalizing the conflict with Putin and characterizing the war as a direct U.S.-Russia showdown have been undermined by his own hardening rhetoric toward the Russian leader in recent days. He made it known earlier this month that he believes that Putin is a war criminal after relentless attacks on Ukrainian cities and civilians that triggered a massive refugee exodus. Biden's comment about the Russian leader's tenure on power was not the only striking rhetoric of his tour. After meeting refugees on Saturday, Biden called Putin a butcher. Previously, Biden had called him a thug and a murderous dictator. And the script from which he departed to make the now notorious remark was in itself hawkish, previewing what Biden said was a long struggle, which sounded a lot like a new Cold War. Given that Biden is likely feeling the burden of world peace on his shoulders and acute empathy for those visited by unspeakable tragedy in Ukraine, his outbursts on his European trip may be understandable as a human reaction to great suffering. He went to the National Stadium in Warsaw and literally met with hundreds of Ukrainians, U.S. Ambassador to NATO Julianne Smith told CNN's Dana Bash on State of the Union on Sunday. "In the moment, I think that was a principled human reaction to the stories that he had heard that day," Smith said, underscoring again that the U.S. didn't have a policy of regime change in Russia.